We're live. Right. Hello, lovely ladies.
Hello, Kieran. Hello, Katie.
Hello, my loves.
Okay, right. So thank you for joining me on Valentine's Day. Couldn't think of two better ladies to spend it with, to be fair. And we are talking about Atlas of the Heart today. So Brené Brown's new book, and I know that we are all mega fans of Brené Brown. I think parts of our journey, she's really helped us. Parts of our journey, she's just been the one author that we come to, isn't it? Because she speaks from the heart. So I'm going to go straight into it, and then we'll see where the conversation takes us. So making meaning, mapping meaningful connection, and I think, don't tell me if I'm wrong or if you disagree, but the way that I've started to read this book, it's very much about the language of the heart. So it's what is emotion and the sort of the language that we should have to articulate how we're feeling. So she quotes Eduardo Berica, I hope I've said that right. As human beings, we can only experience life emotionally. So my understanding of that was that as humans, emotion defines us, or at least defines our experience of our being. So I don't know what do you feel about the book and how it's been sort of centered around the idea of emotion and experiences?
Well, I'll come in there and quote again from the book, but she quotes the German philosopher Wittgenstein, and she said, quoting him, "The limits of my language mean that the limits of my world." And when she was in the introduction, and she's talking about the limits of language to explore emotion, mad, sad, and happy. I've seen this book as a source to help me connect with the complexity of being human and the myriad of my emotions. And then she goes on to say that language shows us naming an experience doesn't give the experience more power. It gives us the power of understanding, and it gives us meaning. So it is like a reference book. It's a map.
Mm-hmm.
To help us get somewhere or know where we're at.
Yeah, I feel you. We were just chatting, and I think that exactly the same as you, Kerry. This is like an atlas. This is to help you on your journey, isn't it? This is something to delve into when you're in a time of need, because there's so much in this book that resonates, but they resonate at different times. So I know all of us have been drawn to completely different chapters, and that is because we're all experiencing different things right now, and we can turn to those pages in a different way that we would with a fiction or another book. This feels like a tool, this book as well. It feels like a source, not just a source of information, but a tool to help you on that journey. Like particularly, speaking as someone who is a coach, this is such a powerful tool to use in coaching, to use in conversations, but also not only in connecting with other people and helping understand their emotions, but this is really powerful to help you to connect with your own emotions, isn't it? And back to yourself, carving out that time to look inwards as opposed to outwards. That's what I found, particularly from the chapters that I've had a look at.
I think, you've both sort of said the next point, really, in the sense that we're all here based on where we are at the moment. So what we've read from the book is sort of where we are in this point in time. And I think, Kerry, I hope you don't mind me saying, but we were a bit unsure about how to start reading this book, in the sense that you start it from the front cover to the back cover. I'm very much that it was what called to me. So I think we were all the same in that sense, that we went to the chapters that just, they resonated with us, because we're somewhere in this point in time where we need a bit of clarity maybe, or we need a bit of that map to help us through.
So I think I would recommend, suggest, use it or lose it, that you read the introduction first. In the introduction, it says, "You are here." But actually, I kind of switched that around and said, like, actually, I'm not sure I do know where I am, or I think I might know where I am. But if my language to explain and understand where I am is limited to mad, sad, and or happy, that isn't rich enough to understand the complexity of emotions and the complexity thus of behavior. So I do think it's read the introduction and then look at the chapters and which one might be calling you. Do you think that's because actually sometimes, you know, like we might be a bit lost.
And that's why we pick up a map, right?
Yeah,
That's the time, in that time of need when we want some direction, where we want to look where we're going to. And I love the way that the chapters start each time with places we go when. So you're looking inwards again. Where am I right now? Where do I want to be? What do I need to understand about myself in order to move forwards? I think that's really clear here.
It definitely evokes that idea of self-reflection. You need to be able to be real with yourself before you move forward. Definitely. Right, ladies, I think we should just get into our chapters then. So Kerry, we're going to start with you. And you've said you've read quite a few. I suppose you've read more than Kate and I, to be fair. Comparison, and then it was the chapter Falling Short, chapter 8, and then chapter 13, self-assessment. But I'm just going to hand over to you about where you are and what you want to do.
Okay, if I talk about chapter 2 first, and then give you and Kate time to talk about your chapters, and then if there's time, I'll come back and talk about another chapter that I've read. So because where we go, because I've started to read it a little bit chronologically, but chapter 2 kind of spoke to me. So that is places we go when we compare, and this kind of spoke to me because I think that act of comparing ourselves to others leads to fear, anger, shame, and sadness, because exploring that chapter, this normalization of comparing, we are all doing it all the time, and it's so embedded in our everyday lives that we forget that we're even doing it. So it's that normalization of comparing. But actually, when we step back, because comparing isn't an emotion, but when we step back from what actually happens to us doing that act of comparing, we want to be, quote, like everyone else, but better. Mm-hmm. So then that act of comparing brings out some negative emotions of fear, anger, shame, and sadness. And I guess one of the reasons why I'm particularly drawn to this chapter is because my daughter is neurologically diverse. She's diagnosed with autism, and all her life she has struggled to be understood. She's fought to fit in, and her differences, she wanted to be the same, and that has been exhausting. That has just been exhausting, and has led to anger. Has led to anger, and has led to sadness. Now, I don't know if either of you two are German speakers. So when I was choosing this chapter, I was thinking, oh gosh, why has it got a German word? So apologies to all those people who are listening. I'll do the Schadenfreude, the Schadenfreude, which is pleasure or joy from someone else's suffering.
Mm.
And that act of comparison brings that out. And we talk about a lot about, we hear this of like toxic cultures or toxic organizations or the toxic lives that we live. Or what do we really mean by toxic? And I'm just here reading this chapter thinking about how that process of comparison, that act of comparison, and I know I'm in danger of repeating myself, but I feel it's powerful to repeat myself, which we're just doing it all the time. And we don't even know that we're doing it. So it's normalized, and through that normalization, it's legitimized. It seems like it's a natural thing. But actually, if we step back from it, you know, and like in an ordinary atlas, you know, you get different maps, don't you? You get the maps which show you the gosh, it's a long time since I've kind of done geography. These are the maps which show you the relief of the land. Then you have the maps which show you the GDP of the countries in that particular region, and then another map which might show you the population. I think this particular chapter, this particular map, is actually allowing us to see just what happens through that act of comparison, and how negative it really is. So again, I'm going to have another go at my German. Freudenfreude, which is pleasure, taking pleasure in somebody else's success, taking pleasure from somebody else's achievement, and really practicing that, and really practicing it with conviction. I'm really proud of you. And I've been, you know, I've been saying that, and I'm really proud of what my daughter's achieved in the last 12 months. And I keep saying, and she needs it a lot. And the more I give it, the more she wants it. But I'm really, really proud of you. And I want to say that to my colleagues, and I want to say it to my friends. And Kate, yesterday, when Women Ed Southeast had a careers clinic, she did a lovely tweet when she said, I'm really proud of what I've achieved. And I was so proud of her for being able to say, I'm proud of myself.
Why do people find it so hard to do this? I think people hold back. I think people find it uncomfortable, don't they? Giving that praise, telling other people how they feel. I think
it's not normalized, is it? From what Kerry has said, it's not normalized. Like, and I think that's it. We need to turn that around, don't we? That narrative around, because I suppose by saying that, oh, well done, it's almost like saying, oh, you're better than me, which is going to make me feel a certain. Yeah.
I think it leaves us open to vulnerability, doesn't it? You know, that's what we're talking about here.
It all leads back, not surprisingly, and when I was thinking about today, I went back to, gosh, it's like many years ago when I taught some geography, the different projections of maps. So either of you geographers?
No.
Okay, so look, no. So I'm going into a space here. I'm going to be making my. So there's different projections of maps, and depending, you know, upon the different projections of how the different, because you know the map that you see is flat, but obviously the world is. Yeah. So a sphere. So how do you turn that into a flat shape, onto a flat piece of paper? So different ways of doing that. So where am I going with that? And I was thinking, actually, what is at the center of this map? the atlas, I keep on doing this atlas of, and it all comes back, and not surprisingly, because Brene Brown, when she began her research and shame, it all comes back to that vulnerability, being able to see vulnerability as a strength.
Yeah, there is strength and courage in being vulnerable with each other. Like Kieran said, we just have to normalize doing that, and find the right places that are safe to be able to practice doing that more often.
It makes me think of that quote. I can't remember who says it, but comparison is the thief of joy as well. Like, it's very much that when you compare yourself to anything or anyone, you're diminishing your capacity for joy, aren't you? But she also talks about, she's written it, hasn't she, about comparison is a creativity killer as well.
Yeah.
So when we think about how richer our lives could be by not comparing, instead creating, it's coming from a more whole place, isn't it, when you're creating rather than comparing? Because you're almost saying, well, I lack this, I'm not abundant in this, so therefore I must be worthless. And therefore that's not going to help you with your creativity, is it? Because if you're feeling that you're less than, how are you meant to manifest more?
But is a little bit of comparison healthy? Does it help us to reconsider things, and does it help us to reflect and think, okay, this is what someone else is doing, this is how they're doing it, how that might inspire me to do it differently, not better, but in your own authentic way? I mean, comparison is always going to be there, isn't it? It's in our nature to do that. We're comparing all the time, and I think, how can we harness that to make it more positive? Because it's going to happen, right? And there's another quote, isn't there, around flowers blooming. You know, a rose doesn't compare itself to a peony, for example. They bloom at the right time. Yeah. And that's it, isn't it? Like, we can look at what other people are doing and say, oh, okay, I can make a decision now. Is that better than I would do it? Or do I feel like I would have done a better job at that? Do I feel like I look better or look less? And that's the unhealthy stuff that's going on up here. But actually, if we're going to compare, if we're going to make those judgments before we even realise that we've made those judgments, isn't that the time where we need to think, okay, so how can I do a better job for myself? Or how can I be at peace with what I am doing? I think that's what needs to come out of that unhealthy comparison that we kind of leap into by nature.
Is it almost reframing it as well? Because when you think of comparison, a lot of people probably think of it as being competitive, and that seems to be something that is, I don't know if I could say it's nurtured, but is that what comparison tends to lead to? Competition, which again, like healthy competition, there's nothing wrong with it, but has it become such a thing where it's normalized to just always compete rather than compare, like you're saying, in a way that's going to better all of us? Because we're learning from each other, aren't we, when we're comparing, if we reframed it in that way, rather than thinking, oh, it's a competition, I must be better than you.
Yeah.
But that competitiveness, again, leads to a lot of anxiety. I've got to be better. I've got to be better, and I've got to fit in. And so I'm not sure what I think about competition being good. Can't we? I don't know, Kieran. I don't know. I've got to really think hard about. Whether I actually, when is competition good? I'm not sure.
I think you have to look at the motivators. Depends what you're motivated by, perhaps. Some people are motivated by love. Some people are motivated by fear. And I think it's okay to be motivated by both of those things at different times. But it's looking at that driver, isn't it? And I think going back to what we were saying to do with comparison is around being judgmental and making assumptions, isn't it? And assumptions, like, that's the dangerous bit, I think, making assumptions about people and how they behave and how they feel and how they're going to respond to you, and taking on the responsibility of other people's feelings And I think this book in particular, because it goes so deeply into the different kind of emotions that we experience, I hope that it will help us challenge some of those assumptions that we make about other people's reactions, perceptions, behaviours, and help enable us not to take on so much responsibility for other people's emotions and feelings.
So then going back to that act of comparison, if we do comparison, but to take joy out of others' achievements, others' differences, then that's a positive emotion or playing out of comparison. But if we're doing comparison to make ourselves feel better because of our superiority over somebody else, or take some pleasure or joy because of their non-achievement or less achievement or difference, then that's something that we want to be, I think we want to avoid.
Mm.
You know, sometimes like when we sort of like if we've come third, we're happy because we're not that many, and there's others who have come fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth. We're happy. We take pleasure because we've not come last.
There's something around. I remember doing a course on well-being with Yale University, and I don't know whether you've heard about this, but it's the person that stands in third place on the podium actually experiences more joy and happiness than the person who is standing at first place, because they've just got a sense of belonging, that they should be there, that they've got, then they're on the podium. They are experiencing more happiness than the person that got first. It's an interesting one to look into.
Bridging to Kate, do you think comparison sort of hinders connection then?
I just think comparison is something that we're doing all the time. I think we're doing it before we know we're doing it, because, as I said, it's to do with assumptions and judgment. Does it hinder connection? Yes, probably. And that's why we need to find spaces where we can go a bit deeper with those connections. We have to listen to people. We make so many assumptions day in and day out about how other people are feeling, that we're not listening. So yeah, I don't want to get hooked on comparison, because I do think it hinders connection, and I think there's a lot of positive stuff, particularly in this book. I mean, there's a whole chapter on connection and on belonging, which is really crucial, I think. But yeah, we have to look beyond those initial judgments that we make about other people. I mean, the space that I work in, as you know, with Heads Up for Head Teachers and as a coach, it's all about creating spaces where people can be vulnerable and talk about the things that are happening in here and going round and round and round in here and in here, that they wouldn't normally be able to talk to people about. So connection for me is a really big one. And actually what we try and break down in those spaces is that feeling of competition and comparison with other colleagues and with other head teachers in particular that could be working in the same locality, but you fear, because of that sort of toxic accountability system and that competitiveness between schools, which is driven by the system because of data and assessment, that you then can't reach out to that person and make a connection, say, do you know what, you're just down the road from me and I was really struggling with this, can I reach out to you and can we have a conversation? People aren't doing that enough, and they're certainly not doing it without any support and guidance. So for me, finding spaces where people can say, actually, I'm not okay, or I need help with this, and making that connection. So yeah, breaking down comparison and breaking down those barriers for me is so crucial to making deep connections with people. And when you're connected, you feel supported, don't you? And when you feel supported and you feel like people are championing you and people have got your back, that's a really safe place to be, right? There's so much in this book about connecting with those emotions, isn't there? Yeah.
But that chapter, which I haven't read, on places we go when we search for connection, I think what you're saying there, Katie, is that linking now the two chapters, the chapter on comparison and the chapter on connection, in our cultures or in our context where we are driven to compare ourselves to the school down the road round the corner who's just got a grade 2, or compare us their reading results with our data, and how does all that, is that a healthy comparison? Possibly not, because it's actually driving us to not making those connections, because it's competitive. This is why I kind of think that is a little bit of competition good, because, and then it drives us to not sharing and not learning with each other and from each other, and then it leads us to insecurity, because we're worried that we're not going to be good enough, and then it leads us to loneliness. So is it all, comparison's got a lot to answer to.
It does. It's a really key barrier. It is, to connection and to belonging, that sense of belonging. I agree.
And she starts that chapter with belonging and fitting in, doesn't she? And I love her stance about belonging, in the sense that in order to belong properly, then you have to be who you are. You can't change to fit in or change to belong. It's about belonging to a community where you are who you are. And she talks about any discussion of belonging has to start with acknowledging that love and belonging are irreducible needs for all people. In the absence of love and belonging, there is always suffering. So it's sort of touching on what you're both saying about when we're comparing and we're not reaching out and we're not sharing that actually we are feeling vulnerable and we do need someone. The first part is about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that's the first thing you think about with children. So why don't we think about that with each other as adults? Yeah,
I think as human beings we seek that connection, don't we? And I know when you said, have a look at this book and what shouts out to you and what speaks to you, this chapter on connection for me is just calling me, and the entire chapter just encompasses the themes around my own core values, love, authenticity, connection. And I think that when you have love, connection and authenticity, and when they're truly present in your life, then that's when you sort of feel very deeply that experience of belonging and that sense of belonging to a community, belonging to yourself, and I think that's what really drew me to this chapter. And I know Brenny describes belonging as something that is so intrinsically hardwired into us as human beings that actually we spend a lot of our time on earth seeking it out, looking for it, trying to find, trying to fit, trying to belong in different sort of sets of groups and communities, and in our schools, in our personal lives, and actually it's quite dangerous to be constantly seeking that sense of belonging, because it's fundamentally problematic. I think if we're driven to connect with people and feel accepted by people and others for the wrong reasons, then that creates even more disconnect with that sense of belonging that we are seeking in the first place. I think Brenny gives a really good example of this on page 158. If we do or say something that's true to who we are, but outside the expectations or rules of the group, we risk everything. If people don't really know who we are and what we believe or think, then there's no true belonging. And so, perhaps I'll invite you two then to just think firstly, is there a time when you've either had to risk your own authenticity to feel connected and accepted, or is there a time when you've had to hide your true self from others in order to belong?
I think it took me an enormous amount of time to know who I am and where I am, and to be true unto myself. And I think that's something that I am so much better at now than I was even 5 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but I think our organisations, our contexts, our families, our social class, all of these things come into that. But if we, I don't want to keep going back to that comparison, but if I'm constantly trying to fit in, then how can I be who I am if to fit in I have to suppress my differences?
Well, this is it, isn't it? You're not, because you're hiding your authentic self in order to belong.
Yeah.
Actually, is it okay to sometimes say, do you know what, I don't belong here? Sometimes we really want to belong somewhere, don't we? In a community or a group. But actually, if we have to hide our true authenticity to fit in, then it's not the right place for us. And that takes a level of acceptance. But I think there'll be loads of women out there in Women Ed and beyond that will go, I've had to hide who I am to be okay in this situation, or I can't bring my feelings and my beliefs to this place because it won't be accepted. That's too much of a risk. And do we risk it? And do we risk it and say how we feel about something and step into that space and risk and be really vulnerable in order to share? I mean, we're all human beings. We resonate with each other's emotions all the time. We just don't talk about them enough in order to get to that point where we resonate, or we don't have that safe space where we can connect and resonate. But Brenny said, I think you said at the start, Kieran, she said true belonging doesn't require us to change who we are, it requires us to be who we are. So again, that is about showing up as ourselves in all our glory, warts and all, being the authentic us, because unless we do that, then we're not going to feel like that we're being ourselves and can be accepted. It doesn't matter, does it, if we're not accepted, as long as we stay true to our values, right?
Yeah, but
it's a risk.
But Kieran earlier talked about how we manage our emotions, and I'm remembering probably about 15 years ago, one of my bosses criticizing me by saying I wore my heart on my sleeve. And I took that as a criticism. And now, 15 years later, I'll be saying, yeah, I'm so pleased everybody gets in my heart.
Yes, because that's emotional intelligence, isn't it? Where else are you going to wear it? You're going to hide it? You can't hide your emotions and can't hide your feelings. There's a disconnect with yourself. And I think if you're hiding that, then you are doing a disservice to yourself. And you're only ever really accountable to yourself, aren't you? I don't know.
But where was that coming from? Where was that criticism coming from? Or I heard it as why did I hear it as a criticism? Because are women, and I'm actually this thing about being emotional is, I don't mean about being crying and but being emotionally literate, emotionally aware, or Brene would talk about empathetic, and all of those emotional qualities in our systems, in our education system, have been devalued.
Well, there's a stereotype around being emotional. That's the problem, isn't it? You're told if you're emotional, you conjure up this image of women crying in cupboards. Like, let's be fair, we've all been there, and it's not our proudest moment, I am sure. It's part of life. That's part of expressing your emotions. There needs to be, I think, an appropriate time and place to express emotions, and that's the bit that needs work. But wearing your heart on your sleeve and being an emotional leader, I think it needs a reframe. Emotional needs to be emotionally literate. Emotional needs to be somebody that is very good at connecting with and having relationships with their colleagues, positive relationships, relationships, being able to read people, understand people, be empathetic with people. That's what we need to conjure up, I think, when we start talking about being emotional. Actually, it's being emotionally literate.
Actually, let me go back to you, Katie. You said, it wasn't our proudest moment when we cried in the cupboard. But why should I be proud of crying in the cupboard? Because I cried in the cupboard. I didn't cry, I didn't cry in the middle of, the middle of the classroom, or I was. But actually, it was an appropriate emotional. There has been something quite harrowing. There's been something incredibly, sad that has happened, and so. It's about, and this thing about how it's difficult. It's difficult to manage, to manage your emotions. And I'm kind of thinking back now to teaching a year 9 RE class, and I was reading an extract of I think it was Bob Geldof. He was talking about the famine in Ethiopia, and he was talking about seeing little children who they just had chronic diarrhea, and they were just dying of diarrhea. And I was reading out this extract, and tears started to come down my face, and I carried on reading it. And I didn't, because how could you not be affected? A piece of literature, like whenever I read Tess of the D'Urbervilles, I kind of, I have to sort of, I get a bit choked by that.
That's an appropriate reaction, isn't it? That's an appropriate emotional reaction to something that is important to you, that you resonate with, that affects you. And that's right. And we need to stop teaching colleagues and children. We need to stop believing that we need to hide this, because we don't.
Is it almost sort of like you're numbing, like you're expected to numb it instead, in the sense that
good word,
it's a risk to feel that, because it's something that she Brenna talks about in one of her other books about, and I think she talked about it at the start of this book as well, about numbing emotion, just like that's why she was drinking, that's why she was doing all these other things, to just numb it, because it's too hard to feel. Because it's deep, isn't it? It is meant to be hard, though. And I think
at the start, I was thinking about numbing and disconnecting and not wanting to know, because when you start to read this book, there are so many moments when you go, oh God, yeah, that's so me, and that's so my experience. And she's articulating the things that perhaps we can't. I think what she's done really well is given us the vocabulary to talk about some of these things as well. But in terms of numbing, I said to you both at the start, there was two chapters that sprung out to me. This one on connection, which is for me very positive, and then there's this one to do with love and heartbreak, and that reaches out for me for another reason. I can't bring myself to read that right now. It's too raw. It's where I am. Again, going back to that map and that journey, I can't read that right now, because that's going to speak to me in a different way, and I want to be ready for when I read that. But there's some really powerful elements here that will speak to us on whichever stage of our journey we are at. But going back to your numbing, like, is it healthy to ignore, dismiss, numb, avoid these emotions? No, it's not healthy, right? We have to face some of these, and it's really difficult. But as I said, having the vocabulary to be able to discuss and talk about them through reading the book is going to be really, really helpful.
I like what you say there, Katie, about how the book is a tool to support our own capacities to be reflective. And some of the things I sometimes say to my students, like holding that mirror up to yourself, and mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? Well, when the Queen asked that question, the mirror answered back something she didn't want to hear, and sent Snow White off into the forest. Sometimes when we hold in that reflective space, so this is a tool to support that process of reflection, we might not like what we see. Then that's about growth, isn't it? That's about learning, and that's another chapter about perfectionism.
Oh, that's a good one. Really good one.
There's this because it's like this moment where I'm not proud, but I'm going to be humble. I'm going to show my vulnerability. On page 149, places that's in the chapter, places we go when we fall short. Never allow anyone to be humiliated in your presence.
There's a lot of leaders that could do with that chapter, right?
Okay, but before we take the splinter out of somebody else's eye, I'm going to take the plank out of my own. I think somebody was humiliated in my presence last week, and I should have, and in future will do more to stop that happening.
So there's a learning curve there, though, isn't there? Yeah.
But then, sorry, that kind of then brings me to the almost like to the end of the book, when I'm kind of like saying that leadership is about getting it right, not being right. And so we're constantly, we're linking back to that chapter on perfectionism. We've got to be constantly learning as leaders and open to that learning, and not seeing leadership about being right, but about getting it right, and about getting, if we're going to try and get it right, that means that sometimes we might not get it right, because we're human beings.
Yeah.
And therefore being able to have that conversation, saying, I didn't get that quite right this time.
People are scared to say that they've got things wrong, aren't they? People are scared to say, I didn't get that right. I mean, I've been there. Everybody's been there, right? And you think, I would have done that a different way, or why did I say it like that? Or, and it's owning up to it, isn't it, and learning from it. It's really uncomfortable. But you're right. That's where we do our growing. That's where we do our healing. That's where we make decisions to do things differently and hopefully better in the future. I think this chapter on connection got me thinking around our desires to show up and lead authentically in our schools, and the kind of barriers that we face that stop us being our true selves and stop us being able to connect, not only with others but with our true purpose of educating and leading. What sort of barriers we're facing. Perhaps we could talk on those for a minute. I think for me then, one of the key aims of my own work is, like, as a coach and as a facilitator, is to connect people in spaces where they feel safe and where it is judgment free and it is confidential, and they can connect with other like-minded folk to talk about some of the barriers. Much like we do at Women Ed, we provide safe spaces and people that share those same values as you, and you feel that you're safe in being vulnerable there, aren't you? But I think there's more than one barrier around feeling connected and being authentic with other people, and then you've got that barrier of belonging. We find that sense of belonging when we are courageous and when we are vulnerable, and then we start to make those connections because we share a bit of our own narrative, and someone else is there in that room and they go, oh, I've been there. Oh, that was me. Yeah, I felt that. I've had that conversation. Yeah, I went through that too. And, then we start to discover that actually we are connected because we resonate with other people's narratives, and actually we're not so alone.
But Katie, if it's culturally and systemically normalized that we are in this competition, that we can't be vulnerable, that we can't be our authentic selves, we can't admit to not knowing, and these create those toxic cultures. They contribute to insecurity and loneliness. and that downward spiral of well-being. We numb who we really are, etc., etc. What's if that is how do we break this? How do we bring about a disruption to that?
I think it's about saying it's okay to be not okay and normalizing that and getting people talking about the challenges that they face and the fears that they chase beyond the operational and beyond the strategic staff. You know, we've got to get people talking about the imposter syndrome, about the isolation, about the fear, about the toxic accountability, you know, and people need to resonate with each other and go, I feel that, let's talk about that, let's normalize that. It must have been about 9 months ago, I did a poll on Twitter via Heads Up for Head Teachers, and we asked the question very simply, head teachers, do you suffer with imposter syndrome? We had about 1,600 responses, and 98% of people said, unsurprisingly, yes, I struggle with imposter syndrome. You know, and that's that barrier, isn't it? But that's a barrier that we can put on ourselves, I think.
Yeah, I think leading into the chapter that I'd written, I think a lot of what seems to be said, I don't think there's enough compassion. I don't think we're treating ourselves with enough compassion, right? Because if you're thinking that you're suffering from imposter syndrome, you're not being very compassionate towards yourself, because there's a reason why you're in that role, or there's a reason why on that journey you're there. So it's almost, how can we practice that? Because, yeah, she also says in the book, we're all made of strength and struggle. And it's almost like when you're in a certain leadership position, you can only show strength, you can only be strong, but then that is going to be a disconnect. That's going to be a tool for disconnect, because if people only ever see you as strong or as Superwoman or Wonder Woman or whatever it is, and they're not going to be able to connect to you, because actually you're not showing the struggle, you're not showing your vulnerability, you're not showing actually there's another side of me. Although it's going to be hard to connect otherwise, isn't it? So I think that's the reason why that one called out to me, was because it's, yeah, and it's a gorgeous quote, compassion is a practice based in the beauty and pain of shared humanity. But if we're not sharing that pain, and that is being completely vulnerable with each other, because you might get shamed, you might get judged, you know, people might be thinking, well, you shouldn't be feeling that way because of where you are. But if we don't show it and we don't articulate it in a way that others are going to hear it, I don't understand how we can be compassionate, really, because it's that language we're not sharing with each other, and we're not talking to each other through the heart. It's very much, there's an armor, and whether you call it like preservation, whether you call it, because there's that other thing about radical candor, isn't it? So I'll have to share it with you after this, but there's a grid where when you're being radically candid about who you are, Kim Scott, and when you're being radically candid towards other people as well, it comes from a place of care. If you genuinely care about someone, it comes from that place of compassion. Sometimes that message isn't going to be easy to say to someone or share with someone, but if it's coming from the right place, which is compassion, then there's still that's the element of connection rather than humiliation or but then it's that, isn't it? You've got to take that armor off to not preserve yourself in that way. It's meant to be difficult though, and I think that's where the system, it's too rigid in that you can't, it's too rigid in a lot of ways. So it's not enabling you to feel or to be a messy human being. It's telling you, no, you must be this, you must be that, because at this point in time you must be doing this, when actually it's not like that. Life isn't linear. It doesn't work that way. I don't know if I've totally confused you both with what I'm saying.
Oh, there's not confused at all, Kieran. There's just lots of threads there, aren't? And this is acknowledging the complexity, and so this isn't a self. So we talked about this book being a book which can be a tool, but it's not a quick fix tool. It is acknowledging the complexity of these issues. And so if anybody was to read this and expect there to be to lead them to a simple solution, it's not going to lead us to a simple solution, because we're dealing with complex, we're living in a complex, human beings are complex, schools are complex, society is complex, and recognizing that complexity is about being honest, and recognizing the difficulty of the challenges we face is about being honest, and recognizing that you can encounter a new challenge that you've never encountered before, and you may not know what to do is normal. So it's normalizing uncertainty, it's normalizing complexity, and it's normalizing that some days you'll feel more. Some days, you go into work and you'll have been up all night because the baby had an earache and just was screaming for 7 hours, and finally went to sleep at 4 a.m. and your alarm went off at 5:30. And so you've had at best 90 minutes, and so you're not probably going to be on your best form that day.
But that brings us back to what Kieran was saying, Kerry, about sort of regulating these emotions. And I think there's a question around when do we feel at our best in order to be able to manage these emotions? And I think that brings us perhaps to that our levels of resilience, and reminding ourselves what we need to do for ourselves in order to keep our self-care bucket filled, and keep our levels of resilience high, so that we are better able to manage and navigate some of these emotions. And again, that's about what is it that what brings us joy, what are we good at, reflecting on that, and actually what are we intentionally doing around making sure that we as women leaders are okay. Are we fully supported? Are we taking care of our mental health? Are we focusing on our physical health? All those beautifully complex challenges that we face. But when we intentionally put the effort in and the work in there, then we do have that resilience, don't we? Maybe not if we've been up for that amount of time with a screaming baby, but there's always something. Life is always throwing something at us, isn't it? Whether it's heartbreak, whether it's having a young child, whether it's difficult relationships at home or at work, those things are the constant. It's our ability to navigate our emotions in a really healthy way that I think we need to work on. And I really think that this book does this, because again, it gives us that vocabulary, it gives us that insight, and there's a lot in here around research and a little bit on statistics and people's stories and other people's narratives around their experiences of these 87 human emotions that we experience. And I swear, you only need one day in a school to experience all 87 of these, don't you? Seriously.
Yes, there's that though, doesn't she? It's one of my favourite things. If research is going to serve people, it has to reflect lived experiences. And I think that's just the point about when we're thinking about our lived experiences, like you're saying, Kate, it isn't simple. And like you say, on any average school day, you're going to feel a lot. You can't numb it, you can't ignore it, you have to. But again, it's how you regulate that. It's almost accepting that emotion as well, though, isn't it? And I think it's what this book definitely does. It gives you the tool, the language to name it and say, because I'll be honest, I had a few misconceptions about empathy. So it's something that's always been described to describe myself. But actually, when I think about it, and when I think about how we're teaching empathy to children as well, it's actually quite a dangerous term if we don't get it right. And the way that she's used research and lived experiences, so she talks about there's two types of empathy. It's not about walking in somebody else's shoes and taking their baggage on as yours, because that is not healthy, and that isn't empathy. And I think there's that misunderstanding. Whereas she says there's cognitive empathy, where you recognize and understand someone's emotions, so you're taking on their perspective rather than their experience. And I think that it builds on what you were both saying about that idea of connecting. We're all going to have felt sad or lonely or isolated at some point in our story. And it's that what we're invited to then tap into, and we can take on their perspective because we know what it feels like from our experience. I think that's the point that she makes in this book. It's about owning your experiences that will then enable you to help others. And then the other one she talks about is effective empathy, where you're sharing the experience, but you're attuning your emotional response to their experience. You're not taking it on board as your experience. And I think that's where boundaries come in as well. And I think some of us, the way that we are as women, I don't know, like, do we have strong enough boundaries? Because it's almost like we're meant to be the nurturers, we're meant to be the ones that take it on. And it's that, isn't it? It's you need to have those boundaries as well.
But I think they're in which one thread am I going to pick up there? And you always say, you just kind of, you give me so many threads to pick up there. I think that empathy is the one thread I want to pick up, is that in any day in our organisations, our colleagues will be experiencing the full range of emotions, and being empathetic by recognizing that some of them, that will be recognizing that. And when you say leave your emotions at home, well, then they'll come in. Well, they'll have just cardboard cutouts. We'll have no people, and that won't be very good. That very good either. And the other thing about that that empathy is really powerfully, you've reminded me of, is not to say I know how you feel. Well, you don't know how a person feels, but what you actually, what you can say is, I know you are feeling. And as leaders, and it seems a kind of, as we come to the end of this discussion, to bring it to that gendered lens, is this, it cannot just be something that is in the domain of women leaders. And I know that some male leaders have got this in bucket loads, and I know some women leaders haven't, and there's another big conversation that we can have there. But actually, I think it comes back to our construct of leadership, whether you're, with, regardless of gender identity, it's about our construct of leadership, and the attributes and the emotional attributes that need to be privileged within that leadership construct. And I think this book helps you to engage with that emotional intelligence and the language of. So going back to that Wittgenstein, it gives us much greater access to language, and through that access to that language, then we become able to understand emotions, and then we can understand emotions. Just like if we've got the map, we understand the map, then we can actually possibly get from A to B more easily. Or know that we didn't really want to go to B, we should have been going to C, because we actually want to go on a ski holiday, and it wasn't really very good to be planning a trip to Mauritius. I don't know if you have skiing in Mauritius. Yeah, I'd like to go to Mauritius.
Kate, is there anything you want to add or say?
Well, there's always a lot I want to add or say, but there is so much in this book, and honestly, I just can't encourage people to get it enough. It is just so helpful in navigating some of those emotions that you recognize in yourself. But this is going to be really helpful in connecting you with your colleagues as well. If you recognize something that they're going through, I feel like this is going to be the go-to tool. Just to pick up, you talked about empathy and boundaries. I genuinely think that boundaries and setting yourself and holding yourself accountable to your own boundaries is the kindest thing you can do if we go back to that self-compassion, putting boundaries in place for yourself and respecting them and honouring them that will help you build up that resilience, that will help you feel safer, that will help you in your communication to your colleagues and family about what you need and what you desire. And there's a really good chapter in here that covers that on boundaries. Boundaries are the distance for which I can love you and me simultaneously. It's a lovely quote there. It's it's a lovely quote that she uses in this chapter around empathy and sympathy and pity and compassion and all those things that we experience as leaders in school, particularly when we're working with families and in the community.
And it's a beautiful book, and it's got lovely pictures.
It's gorgeous. I mean, I wish we could share this.
And I don't know if I can hold. That's sort of like no, that way. Am I holding it?
You've got it.
Yeah, and it's full of beautiful illustrations and a whole. It's just something that you want to carry around with you. It's a kind of bit heavy. Kim and I did say it's a bit heavy to read in the bath, and it's like all my little post-it things stuck in it. But I've actually now gifted it to two dear friends. So it's a beautiful book. I'm on no commission. It's a beautiful book, and I think it's one that you just sort of want to carry around close to your heart.
Yeah. I think, ladies, like the one that really resonated was the idea of connection and love, because she's very much about that, isn't she? Speaking from the heart and knowing yourself and loving yourself first. And I just think this is a lovely way to sort of, don't want to end it. Connection that can be cultivated. We can love ourselves only as much as we can love others. And then she talks about love in the sense that it's a gritty, dangerous, wild-eyed, justice-seeking love. And I don't know how anything else could be closely aligned with your purpose than that phrasing. That it's that, isn't it? It's you seeking justice for yourself in the sense of who you are, who you want to be. And that's, you're going to connect with the right people that way, aren't you? Because you're being true to yourself first.
Where's that quote from, Kieran? Because that's such a love. I want to find that. It's
in the connection part. It's Teresa Wiseman's Attribute of Empathy. So I'll find the pages for us. Oh, here, look, it's page. So that quote is 186.
186.
Yeah, we need more real love. So, ladies, this has been just absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Oh, I found it now. I just wanted to find it. Thank you, Kieran. I always just so love talking with you and joining in these discussions. And Katie, it's been just such a pleasure to meet you this afternoon and to share this lovely book with you. And a new connection I feel I've made. So thank you so much.
Kate, I think she's frozen.
It's lovely to see you both. It's just such a gorgeous book, and I think it will connect so many people.
Absolutely. Ladies, thank you so much. What I'm going to do is retweet this now. So if there's people that want to add their thoughts, insights, anything, then everyone is most welcome to. But thank you again, and happy Galentine's Day to you both.